All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My time here says 3 o'clock, so I want to go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover. My panelists, can everyone hear me all right? My audio is coming through. Okay, great. So welcome everyone to the first day of the Capital District Clean Communities Municipal EV Readiness Workshop. Just want to go through a few things quickly. Remind everyone that the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted online on the CDCC website as well as the Capital District Clean Communities Coalition website. So I will pass that link along once today and tomorrow's presentations are up. Also want to remind all attendees that to submit any questions, you can use the question and answer function, and I'll be moderating that and trying to answer those questions at the end of each presentation today. So quickly, I'm going to go over today's presenters because we did have a last-minute addition to the agenda. So my name is Jacob Beeman from the Capital District Clean Communities Coalition. I'm going to be doing a brief introduction on the coalition and kind of some welcome slides. Then we'll have Jill Fauci-Henk from the Capital District Regional Planning Commission to talk about the Clean Energy Communities program that they operate. Next, we'll have Amina Hassan from WXY Architecture to go over some EV planning and policy tools that municipalities can use to advance electric vehicle adoption. And finally, today we'll have Ron Semp from Plug-in Stations Online, an electric vehicle charging infrastructure installer, to go over some planning and permitting do's and don'ts that they find kind of ease the installation of electric vehicle infrastructure in communities. So as I mentioned, first just wanted to go over some introduction slides on the Capital District Clean Communities Coalition in case some of you on the call aren't familiar. Again, my name is Jacob Beeman. I'm the coordinator of the coalition. And so really kind of what is Clean Cities, or in our case, the Clean Communities Coalition. So Clean Cities is a U.S. Department of Energy funded program, which kind of utilizes local public-private partnerships to work with local fleets to reduce petroleum consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce dependence on imported petroleum products. So we really try to work with our local stakeholders to kind of advance the transition to alternative fuels for the sustainability and emissions benefits, but also to focus on kind of the resiliency that adopting an alternative fuel vehicle fleet brings, especially in times of emergency where potentially traditional gasoline and diesel fuel supplies are cut short. So again, not only are we focusing on the environmental benefits of transitioning to alternative fuels, but also the resiliency and fuel security benefits that it brings as well. Wanted to touch quickly on the Capital District Transportation Committee. I know many of you on the call were potentially learned about this webinar through the CDCC mailing lists. So the Capital District Clean Communities Coalition is hosted within the Capital District Transportation Committee, which is the metropolitan planning organization for the Albany, Schenectady, Troy, and Saratoga Springs metropolitan area. So effectively what that is the Saratoga, Schenectady, Albany, Rensselaer, four-county, what we call, kind of the four-county capital district around the city of Albany, which includes 77 municipalities and 8 cities. And the primary function of the MPO is the planning and programming of federal transportation dollars through our planning process. Some of the major documents that we produce are our long-range plan, which is set of guidelines and principles for planning over the next 20 to 30 years that will hopefully, kind of push the region towards the transportation goals that we see. Next would be the Transportation Improvement Program, which is a 5-year list of funded capital improvement projects for the region. And then also our Unified Planning Work Program, which is essentially our 2-year budget document, which goes over all of the work we do and the budget estimates for each program. So I am an employee of the Capital District Transportation Committee, but also the coordinator of the Clean Communities Coalition. So if you're familiar with CDTC, it's essentially just another one of the programs that we operate, but more focused on transportation and specifically alternative fuels. So back to the coalition itself. As I mentioned before, Clean Cities coalitions are really made up of those public and private stakeholders that we gain on a local level. Most of our members are kind of committed to the idea of transitioning to alternative fuels and have either already begun that transition of their fleet or are interested in taking their traditional gasoline or diesel fleets and starting to move them over to more alternative fuel types. What we try to do is help all of those stakeholders to facilitate that adoption of alternative fuels, putting them in touch with other fleets that potentially have already made that transition, and also providing outreach and education events, kind of like what we're doing here today. So I've mentioned that Clean Cities is, we really focus on our local stakeholders and membership, but, what makes it work is that Clean Cities coalitions are throughout the country. So there's close to 100 local coalitions who all have those local kind of grassroots connections and are working to facilitate all fuels adoptions across the country. But the benefit that gives us is that we're in close contact with all of the other coalitions and coordinators, meet regularly. Typically we meet once a year in person on a normal year to kind of have a national workshop where we get to pick other coordinators' brains and see what's going on the alt fuel fronts kind of across the country. But it also allows us to kind of work more directly with other coalitions, within our region to host joint events. For instance, earlier this year, we hosted a joint electric school bus webinar with the other 5 New York Clean Cities coalitions. And we have another one that we're in the works of planning for October on an electric heavy duty vehicle webinar as well. So, we really do get to benefit from kind of the other coordinators' knowledge from across the country and try to bring that back to our local stakeholders. In terms of our technical portfolio, what we mean by that is, we like to mention in all of our presentations that Clean Cities is a fuel neutral organization. So even though we're here today to talk about electric vehicles in particular, depending on the fleet type of any of our stakeholders, whether it's light, medium, heavy duty vehicles, really all fuel types of alternative fuels are in our ballpark. And we're really looking to work with that individual stakeholder on what that alternative fuel, what the best fit is for them in their fleet. So really want to kind of reiterate that because today we are focused specifically on electric vehicles. So what we do, kind of already gone over this a little bit, but getting into a little more specific. So as I've said, we like to, our main purpose here is to facilitate kind of act as a liaison between our stakeholder fleets and industry partners that are going to help them adopt alternative fuels, whether that's infrastructure providers or vehicle OEMs that can provide them information on products that they might be interested in. Or again, connecting them with another local fleet that's kind of already made the transition that they can pick their brain and learn from. That's really our role, as well as identifying and kind of working with stakeholders to navigate any incentives that are out there to acquire alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure. And we also do work on some data collection and tracking programs where we'll collect the current prices of alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure for the region. We document that and report it back to Department of Energy. So, you know, along with all the other coalitions in the country, they have a pretty robust idea of, you know, what the technology is actually costing people in the real world, folks on the ground. Here are just a few examples of some work that we've done in the past. You know, some EV bus demos where people kind of get to that ride and drive effect and experience some technology that perhaps they haven't been able to experience before. Also some workshops that help the stakeholders navigate available incentives. So back in 2013, there was a truck voucher workshop. You see on the bottom right-hand corner, the Capital District Zero Emission Vehicle Plan. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So back in 2016, the coalition released their kind of first iteration, the Capital District Electric Vehicle Charging Station Plan. This was produced along with NYSERDA and consultant help as well, and really focused on assessing the electric vehicle readiness of the Capital District, focused on current gaps in charging stations within the region and actually across the state as well, and provided some recommendations on how to address that. Last year in 2019, we decided to go a little bit further on that, update the plan since there had been significant changes since 2016, and kind of reassess that electric vehicle readiness of the region, and go on to, again, provide some barriers and opportunities for electric vehicles in the Capital District and across the state as well. So what we've got here on this slide, just want to go into a couple pieces of information that we can pull from that plan quickly, and then kind of bring us to how we ended up here on the municipal readiness workshop. So overall, we look at electric vehicles on the road in the Capital District and public level 2 charging outlets in the Capital District. Seen significant growth over the past 10 years on both fronts. Over 3,500 registered electric vehicles in the region and around 660 public level 2 charging outlets. So that's plugs, not stations. So, you know, we've kind of looked at the region and you know, it looks pretty good. It's a good place for electric vehicles. There's lots of charging, and we keep seeing registrations improving, but still overall, that's less than 1% of all light duty electric vehicles, or light duty vehicles, the entire light duty vehicle fleet. It's less than 1%. So still a long ways to go, you know, in that sense. So in our plan, we also kind of touch on a few policies of New York State. These are among others, but I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Clean Energy Community Protection Act. Some, you know, kind of goals set by New York State to achieve zero emission electricity by 2040 and reduce emissions, overall emissions by 85% by 2050 from 1990 levels. So what we really want to pull from this is that we think electric vehicles are, you know, still in a great place, and actually, you know, the policy of New York State is, you know, providing them with even more opportunity by setting these ambitious goals. You know, with a zero emission grid, electric vehicles are going to be, you know, a large contributor to those emissions reductions. Also, some general kind of goals that the state has put out is 10,000 electric vehicle charging stations by the end of 2021, and 850,000 total zero emission vehicles in the state by 2025. So just kind of on my last check of those numbers, there's 52,000 registered electric vehicles in the state as of today. That's battery electric and plug-in hybrid. Actually, as of July of this year, so could have gone up slightly. And around 4,300 electric vehicle charging stations. So again, still a ways to go to reach those goals, which is why we want to kind of continue the outreach and education in events like this today to kind of continue to propel us towards those goals. Finally, from the plan, a number of electric vehicle barriers and opportunities were identified. One of those was municipal EV readiness policy. In particular, we kind of think that there's a great opportunity here with municipalities to adopt EV ready policies for a number of reasons. On the one hand, they obviously have their own fleets that could benefit to be transitioned to battery electric if they're light duty, or potentially even more medium and heavy duty fleets in the future. But also municipalities have the opportunity to tweak zoning and building policy to make it easier for new development to incorporate electric vehicle charging infrastructure and potentially make electric vehicles more visible within their community to really kind of act as a snowball effect within that municipality and increase the adoption of electric vehicles. So that's what brings us here today. Hopefully we have all the right people in the room, municipal employees and industry experts to kind of talk through these things and work out what can be done really on municipal policy to spur electric vehicle adoption. So that's my presentation for right now. I think I'm going to pass it over to Jill, since we do have an additional speaker here, and then potentially go over any questions on those first two presentations, if there are any at that time. So Jill, if you want to share your screen, we can go ahead with your presentation. And I've got a quick introduction for Jill here. Jill is a senior planner at Capital District Regional Planning Commission and works with communities around the region to implement the goals and objectives of their Clean Energy Communities program. So, are you there, Jill?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Do you?
So just a logistical, I'm on my computer and I'm on my phone. I'm on my phone so that you can hear me without a delay, but I was going to share my screen via my computer. But I should be signed in under the panelist under both, but I clicked on share screen and it says host disable participant screen sharing. So I can go ahead and just talk through my slides. I can shoot them to you in an email if that works, and then once you get it, you can bring it up. But it's not super critical that we have the slides.
You can go ahead if you want to shoot me an email. You should be able to share, but
I'll try again. Well, yeah, it might be because I'm on 2 accounts. I have low speed internet, so the difficulties. Okay,
if you want to send me your slides, you can start the presentation, then I can.
Sure. Let's see if I can talk and do this at the same time. So my name is Jill Hank. I work for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. I'm a part of the sustainability team along with my director, Todd Fabosi, and my colleague, Tara Donadio, who's also on the call right now. I am an outreach coordinator for what is called for the Clean Energy Communities program.
Hey, Jill, real quick. I think you can share now.
Oh, I was just really impressed with myself that I sent an email at the same time that I was talking. Hold on. Okay, let's see. Okay. Here it is. Can you see it?
It's coming. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I just assume everything is my fault, so I'm glad for once it's not.
Thanks.
Okay. Can you see my slide?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm an outreach coordinator for the Clean Energy Communities program, which is a NYSERDA program that offers incentives for municipalities to complete renewable energy and energy efficiency actions. So this next slide is, if you go to the Clean Energy Communities map, it will show you the designated and participating municipalities in the region. So as you can see here, Tara and I work in the 8-county capital region, which includes Warren, Washington, Columbia, Greene, in addition to Saratoga, Schenectady, Rensselaer, and Albany counties. So we work with villages, towns, counties, and cities to help them work through this program. And just a brief overview of the program. I'm not going to spend too much time on the details, but very basically, the first iteration of the program, there are 10 high impact actions. And if you completed 4 out of those 10 high impact actions, you could access match-free grants for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. So here are those 10 high impact actions. So now would be a good time to mention that there is no more funding left in that program, but we are eagerly anticipating the release of a new version of this program, hopefully by the end of this month. So if you know Tara and I, and you've worked with us in the past, I would anticipate some sort of announcement email, hopefully within the next few weeks. We anticipate there will be additional funding for similar actions. So stay tuned on that. But back to EV readiness. One of the 10 high impact actions from the original program was clean fleets. So clean fleets is achieved by a municipality if you either incorporate an alternative fuel vehicle into your municipal fleet, or if you install a charging station that's publicly available. So part of our assistance is that we would help municipalities, one, either complete 4 high impact actions to make them eligible for the match-free grant funds, and a handful of municipalities use those grant funds to purchase an electric vehicle for their fleet. And the other, it's kind of a 2-pronged approach. The other thing that we can assist with is applying for state grants in order to install charging stations. So one of the things that I spent quite a bit of time on with a lot of the municipalities I worked with, in particular, is the ZEV rebate, the DEC ZEV rebate, which is you have to apply through the Grants Gateway portal. And if anybody has ever used that platform before, it's extremely cumbersome. So I'm not sure lucky for me, but lucky for a lot of municipalities that I've worked with in the past, I've become an expert, and I've helped apply for those grants as well as complete the reporting for those grants. There's also the NYSERDA incentives, and here I believe I have a slide on this. Oh, we're jumping ahead. Here it is. So this is just kind of a brief overview of the funding sources that we will help municipalities work through. There's the zero emissions vehicle rebate that I mentioned, which I'm sure Adam will touch upon. It's not open right now, but it does require 20% match. But previously, before the Charge Ready New York rebate was available, this is what most municipalities used for their charging stations. It also covers a larger portion of the charging station grant, opposed to the Charge Ready rebate, which only offers $4,000 per port for a level 2 station. There were some national grid incentives, which I believe were kind of tailing out there. I'm not sure if they're still available, but I anticipate there will be more funding for that in the future. So let's jump back up to this slide. Why should a municipality install electric vehicle or purchase fleet EVs? Our way of explaining this to municipalities is that electric vehicles are expanding. They're becoming much more popular, and in addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and checking off one of the boxes for the Clean Energy Communities program, this can be an economic development driver. So people who drive electric vehicles may not know that your town exists unless they check one of the many maps available that show where charging stations are. And then they'll come to your town to charge, maybe go out and grab a bite to eat. So we propose it as an amenity to a lot of these municipalities. We discuss, level 2, level 3 chargers. Obviously, there's a big cost difference between the two, but there's also drivers for wanting both levels of charging. The other thing that's kind of overlooked, in addition to the initial installation, purchase of the hardware, purchase of the software, there are ongoing costs associated with the stations because you do have to pay for the maintenance as well as the software. So that's something that we like to educate municipalities on so that they can plan for their budgets moving forward. This is just a list of some of the municipalities that we've worked with that have charging stations or electric vehicles. And the other thing that I just wanted to touch on is, this is obviously a really fast evolving technology. And it's something that Tara and I like to continually educate ourselves on about the technology available. We had a call last week or a couple of weeks ago on a charging station that it was actually, well, there's a couple of calls. We had one, it was a charging station with solar panels on it, which is really attractive, especially nowadays for municipalities, cities specifically, who may not want to go through the cumbersome process of permitting. Plus it has an added element of resiliency because it's solar powered. It doesn't necessarily have to be attached to the grid. And then similarly, there's a new charging station available that is battery powered. So, this is what we do. We try to educate ourselves on the newest technology available. And we are here as a resource to any municipal officials looking to, participate in the program, install an electric vehicle charging station, purchase an electric vehicle, or if they're just curious about the resources out there. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions, but feel free to reach out in the future if you're interested in any of these resources that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. And I think that's a really good point about how electric vehicle charging infrastructure can kind of act as an attraction and an economic development tool and kind of attract consumers to the municipality. I think that's a really good point. We do actually have a question for you, Jill. So the question is a school district considered a municipality under the CC program? What is available for school districts?
So unfortunately, Mike Francini would like to answer this question live. So I can say, no, it is not. It is not part of, it is not a municipality, but if Mike would like to expand on that, please feel free.
No, I think that's, I just clicked answer question live.
Oh, that was you.
And I'm Mike Francini on the webinar
okay.
software, so you can answer.
Unfortunately, and this has come up a lot recently because obviously schools are experiencing a lot of budget cuts at the moment. Unfortunately, that doesn't fall under our program, but maybe Adam can talk a little bit more about, I know there's a school bus program, and I do believe that NYSERDA and perhaps the DEC have programs that are specifically geared towards schools, but unfortunately Clean Energy Communities is not.
Yeah, and I think so tomorrow afternoon it'll be Jason Zimbler from NYSERDA actually speaking on the current incentive programs. And yeah, currently under the New York State truck voucher incentive programs, there is money out there for the incremental cost of an all EV school bus compared to a traditional diesel school bus. So I think potentially tomorrow Jason could maybe elaborate on that a little more. So that's
about it. I wonder, it might just be because I don't specifically work with schools, but I'm not sure whether or not schools may be eligible to apply for the ZEV funding when it is available, but I'm not sure. I can double check on that, or perhaps somebody can answer that later on in this presentation.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely that question was from Rhea Courtney Bozick. And Rhea, I think I might have a few other things that I could follow up with you with as well. So thank you for that question. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box right now. So I think we're right on schedule if we want to. Amina, if you want to share your slides, you're up next. And so next we have Amina Hassan from WXY Architecture to speak on electric vehicle planning and policy tools that municipalities have. Amina is an urban planner and project manager with WXY Architecture and Urban Design, where she works with municipalities across the Northeast to develop sustainable and equitable mobility solutions that leverage new technology. As an associate at WXY, Amina is currently working on developing a pilot program to use cashless commuter vans, or dollar vans, to improve first last mile connections to transit deserts in New York City. She joined WXY with background in research, community-based planning, and affordable housing, and looks to advance social justice and equity in all of her work. Amina is also a founding member of Black Space, a collective change makers and system thinkers working together to demand a present and future where Black people, Black spaces, and Black culture matter and thrive. As a collective member, she also co-organizes Spaces and Places, a yearly forum amplifying planning and design initiatives led by and with Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Amina, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to participate. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear, thank you.
Excellent. So I will try not to repeat some of the information that Jacob and Jill presented earlier. As Jacob mentioned, I'm an urban planner at WXY Architecture and Urban Design. We're an integrated planning design and architecture firm with offices in New York City, Chicago, and the DC metro area. I specifically have worked on a lot of electric vehicle infrastructure planning projects and program development to support electrification of transportation my 4 years at WXY. A lot of those projects in collaboration with NYSERDA and with cities and municipalities across the lower Hudson Valley region primarily. And some of those projects have included developing an on-street charging pilot program for Department of Transportation in Con Edison that is forthcoming. We're excited and hoping that those installations will be coming in the ground soon in New York City. Developing siting and design guidelines to help guide electric charging station installations, planning policy tool guides for creating EV-ready cities and towns, setting and design guidelines specifically for New York City in the installation context, among different programs that really help to support programs that encourage use of electric vehicles of all types and all sizes. So if anybody has any questions on some of those previous projects, I'd be happy to answer them further on. But today, what I was planning on covering is giving a brief introduction to electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or EVSE, which is often the shorthand. Electric vehicle supply equipment is another word that's often used. I'm going to cover some of the electric vehicle planning and policy tools that are available for municipalities and cities. Some of the other options that can help to encourage a transition to electric vehicles. And then I'm going to cover a little bit about how municipalities and planning boards can play a role in facilitating charging station installation. And if we have time, I'm also just going to briefly discuss New York City's on-street charging program as a case study that I've participated in from the research phases through to implementation phases. So this part I'm going to go through fairly quickly because I know that Jacob and Jill covered some of that information already. So first, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on what I'm talking about when I'm saying electric vehicles. We're talking about battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, essentially any battery-powered electric motor that is it's required to be plugged in to an electrical source in order to rebuild a charge. The electric models in the past 5 years have really expanded enormously. So there are now, I think, up to 40 different battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. You can tell my presentation is a little out of date already, which you'll find to be true kind of anytime you're reporting on numbers, because it changes so quickly. But so that really spans from consumer regular consumer entry level prices to luxury models to kind of mid-size and heavier duty vehicles. I'm focusing much more on the consumer level vehicles in this presentation. And those ranges have really also improved enormously over the past 5 years. Some of the early plug-in hybrid electric vehicle models had about maybe 11-mile electric range. Now that we're seeing ranges up to 30 miles for a plug-in hybrid, and then ranges for fully battery electric powered vehicles are now coming up to 220 miles, e-miles or more. And there's really, there's increasingly a resale market for electric vehicles as well, which is allowing these vehicles to come down in price and open up the opportunities for a wider cross-section of people to actually purchase these vehicles and use them. And as I mentioned earlier, battery EVs require a source to charge. There are 3 charging levels, and I apologize if this is too basic for the folks on the call, but I do think it's good to just get a level playing field if there are folks who aren't as familiar with the infrastructure. So a level 1 charging station is the most basic charging station level, essentially equivalent to plugging your vehicle into your home, 120 alternating current, 120 volt supply, which is standard on any commercial or residential property. The level 2 charging stations is what I'll focus on. And level 2 charging stations, they take about 4 to 8 hours to charge, typically require a heavier power supply, 240 volts supply. So that will be standard in most commercial contexts, but not necessarily standard in a residential context. So those who are interested in having a faster charge and installing a level 2 charging station may have to upgrade their electric panel to accommodate for that increased charge power. And then direct current fast charging stations. These charging stations are freestanding, but require 480 volt supply. It's a much bigger drain on the grid. Typically would only be used in heavier duty contexts where fast turnover would be required, such as a rest stop along a highway or a public metro area where there's a high frequency of turnover. So here are just some images to the levels of charge. So level 1, essentially you take your car, plug it into the wall with some kind of converter. Level 2 charging station, these stations can be freestanding or wall mounted. It really depends, or even pole mounted. And then this is a cool example of a direct current fast charge hub. As far as I know, it's the first direct current fast charging hub in North America, and it was built on a converted gas station. And this is in Tacoma Park, Maryland, so I'm proud because that's where I was born and raised. Proud to see they're leading. I think it's also helpful when we're talking about planning for electric vehicles, both to understand the charging station types the charging station levels, but also the charging station types. So there are a few different kind of standard models for electric charging stations. There's the freestanding pedestal station. There are freestanding charging, what I like to call charging towers. They're quite a bit taller than a pedestal. A pedestal might be equivalent to a municipal meter in size and bulk on the sidewalk. Charge tower will be quite a bit taller, maybe 7 feet to 12 feet tall. A pole-mounted charging station, so essentially the charger can be rigged up onto any kind of existing pole, electric pole or other. And then there's a model that hasn't taken off in the US yet, but is increasingly popular in Europe. And specifically, there's a charging program in London. And that's a plug-in socket model where the user supplies their own cord and the electrical source, the charging pole or the light pole is configured with a socket that users can plug into directly with their own cord that has a metering system subscription. You know, WXY is the architecture and urban design firm. When we're thinking about new infrastructure, we're also thinking about what its impact is on streetscapes. And so here's a few slides that allow you to see some of the popular charging models and how they, their visual impact or size and bulk impact in comparison to an average size female, which is 5'3" in the US, quite a bit shorter than I thought it might be. So, you know, on the right side, you'll see there's a municipal meter, which is a standard size for a municipal meter in New York City is 5'11". And here are a range of popular pedestal charging station options that are on the market today. The charge tower, as you can see, is a little bit taller, or quite a bit taller than the average US female. And then pole-mounted charging station options, essentially, you take that first charging station and can there are configurations that allow you to mount it onto the pole. They can be mounted at different heights. Optimal height still allows for AV accessibility and actually accessing the charge cord so that you can plug it into your car. So that actually is going quite into the weeds, but we can talk more about that if anybody has any questions. There's also an important consideration when thinking about charging in the public realm, whether it be on street or in garages, which is the cord management system, since there are some hazard implications for how the cords are managed in the public realm especially. So there are a few different models that are used across those charging station examples that I gave. There's a wind up where the user, much like a hose on your house, you just wind it up onto some sort of shelf that keeps the cords organized and in place. There are some charging station models that are self-retracting. So when you put a cord, the plugs back in place, the cords actually retract into the mechanism or elevated in such a way that while it doesn't retract into the mechanism, the shelving itself, the cords are kept off the ground, which was important when we were thinking about New York City's on-street charge pilot context especially. There are self-retracting within the mechanism as well, a real system inside. The pros and cons specifically related to wear and tear on the cord. And then again, I mentioned earlier, the user supplied cord or the plug-in socket model. I use those words interchangeably. Essentially, there's a socket. The user is responsible for having the cord that has the metering and mechanism for payment to get that charge. The charging station models, not every level of charge is suitable for every installation context. So when we're thinking and planning for providing electric vehicle infrastructure, especially in public access in the public realm, low turnover contexts such as single family homes, level 1 charge is usually adequate, even though it is quite a long charge. Those can be suitable for multifamily contexts as well. However, the level 2 charging station is, I think, the most typically used charging station for multifamily contexts, for commercial contexts, and for municipal and private fleets. And just to remind everyone, that can give most vehicles a full charge in 6 to 8 hours. 4 to 6 hours. It depends on the charge rate of the vehicle. Whereas the direct current fast chargers, both because of the cost to install and the size requirement and the electrical requirement to get a powerful charge, those are more suitable for municipal or fleet contexts or public metro areas, anywhere where there's anticipated high turnover, and where a short charge is advantageous. So for example, recently Uber set forth a goal of having all of their vehicles, all of their for-hire vehicles in North America to be electric vehicle trips. And so for a for-hire vehicle model, having a fast charge where you can go into the station, charge for 30 minutes and come out with a full charge would be super important. Or for any kind of delivery model, that would also be important. So zero emission vehicles are, now that we have a basic understanding of the charging stations, charging levels, and the models and cord management systems, as was mentioned earlier, electric vehicle registrations are increasing and are changing every day. So this data is actually out of date now. It's from March 2020. And since then, we've already increased to 53,000, nearly 54,000 registered electric vehicles in New York State alone. That still represents a market share of less than 1%. Electric vehicles as part of the overall share of light duty vehicles in New York State, but it is increasing, and it's increasing significantly from one quarter to the next and from 1 year to the next. And it's really important that as electric vehicle registrations increase, as more vehicles become available that are appeal to a cross segment of different users in New York and in the US, you have to have adequate charging infrastructure. And that helps to assuage range anxiety. It helps to make sure that there's enough charging stations and that fleet vehicles, and both private and public fleet vehicles, have adequate charging locations. And it also opens up the option for folks who live in multifamily residential contexts who might not have access to a private garage where they can install their own charging station. It opens up the market to them to consider owning an electric vehicle and transitioning from a conventional internal combustion engine to an EV. And that's where municipalities really play such a crucial role in helping support that transition. And it's by encouraging installation of adequate charging infrastructure in municipalities and in new developments that may come by planning board members. So again, I mentioned this is already out of date. This data was pulled in January. We've increased. And there are really a lot of reasons why municipalities should consider installing electric charging stations and encouraging a transition to EVs. There's the fuel efficiency, the environmental benefits of zero tailpipe emissions. There's the electricity, the cost saving element in New York State, electricity costs less overall than gas. Also, the vehicle itself, since the vehicles themselves cost less to maintain since they have fewer moving parts. There's no oil change from year to year. Typically, you get a net less maintenance costs on an electric vehicle for an individual. In New York State, we're lucky to have a relatively clean electric grid. So the environmental benefits of electric vehicles really are somewhat dependent on how clean the electricity is that is powering the charging station or the vehicle. In New York State, there's an energy efficiency of equivalent to 231 miles per gallon, which is actually quite high, as you can see, compared to other areas in the US. And then, as Joe mentioned earlier, there are multiple benefits for municipalities themselves to actually install electric charging stations and to support those drivers. It's been proven and researched over and over again that electric vehicle drivers will change their driving patterns and they will change their route to support destinations that have chargers. So it will attract, by installing electric vehicle charging stations in public access locations in your municipality, you will attract electric vehicle drivers. And an electric charge doesn't take, unless you're considering a fast charge, it usually takes a few hours. So for those few hours where somebody is coming to charge in the municipality, they will be browsing your main streets and shopping and eating in restaurants, COVID willing. There are also other benefits that improve air quality, increase energy independence, especially with those options that Jill mentioned earlier, battery storage and solar panel, solar powered electric charging stations. So I'm going to go through some of the planning and policy tools that are available to you. This is by no means comprehensive, but there is no one-size-fits-all policy approach to increasing EV readiness. It really depends on where you are and what your priorities are and how your municipality operates. But we do have several tools at hand: zoning, codes, permitting, parking, partnerships, and procurement that you can use to either allow, incentivize, require, or regulate the installation of EV charging stations. So zoning, codes, and permitting, those tools can be used to simply allow electric charging station installation. And so that can be a really simple change, which is including a definition of electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging station in a municipal code, including electric vehicle charging station in a list of uses in the use table in your codes. It's including definitions and zoning ordinances to ensure that electric charging stations are permitted in logical locations. You know, you might use these tools as a way of setting high-level design and accessibility and parking enforcement criteria. So, for example, to say that a parking spot that has an electric vehicle charging station will be reserved for the exclusive use of electric vehicles. And more. You can use zoning and parking to help to incentivize installation of electric charging stations. So considering having pre-wiring or charging station installation exchange for a developer incentive. So for example, you could reduce overall parking requirements in exchange for having electric vehicle enabled parking spot in a new development or parking lot. And typically developers will like this type of incentive because it costs a lot of money to build parking. And so it's advantageous for them, for their pro formas, to have an overall parking reduction in exchange for installing electric vehicle charging station. Also, you can provide advantages for the drivers themselves. So for example, if you're imagining a big public fare or any crowded leisure destination, tourism destination, by locating or putting the charging stations near to the entrance, you're signing to all drivers that electric charging gets priority, which can be an incentive to drivers everywhere. It also can help to just promote the infrastructure overall. A lot of folks won't consider buying an electric vehicle if they've never seen an electric vehicle, if they've never seen one charging. By putting those vehicles front and center, it does the advertising for itself and allows people to ask questions and engage and read about any charging programs that are available. And really helps to encourage a transition to electric vehicles just by showing that they're there, that people drive them, that they're cool cars, etc. And then there are opportunities to work closely with private or semi-public-private partnerships to install infrastructure in the public realm. And we're seeing those partnerships kind of all spring up all over the place. So in the past, there have been electric car share programs that installed quite a bit of public access charging infrastructure across the cities. For example, Indianapolis had quite a robust car-to-go type, Blue Indy electric car share program that installed a lot of infrastructure. That program has since ended, but now the city is converting those charging stations for other uses and for other car share availability. And that's where the Clean CDC can, I think, also help to connect people to resources and to programs. And then the strongest mechanism at your disposal is to really require electric charging stations. So to use zoning and codes to require a minimum installation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in new garages or lots, commercial developments, or even residential developments. And it's important that when in any of those considerations that you properly plan for signage and wayfinding and clearly mark the new rules and regulations. Since it is a new type of use in a parking lot, you want to make sure that people understand what that use is. So if the spot is reserved for electric vehicles only, it will be important to include a sign that says that. And that also says, maybe what will happen if a non-electric vehicle is parked there. So maybe there will be enforcement or fines associated with non-electric cars parking in an electric-only spot. I'm going to skip over the examples because I'm taking too long. But there are a few action items that municipalities consider. Adding EV charging language to municipal zoning, setting goals for electric charging station installation, establishing regulations for EV-only spots, being a role model, leading by example by installing electric charging stations in public access areas, and then really working with municipal staff, inspectors, and planning board members to make sure that everybody is aware of this new infrastructure and why it's important to help promote it. And quickly, I wanted to mention that a policy vision at the local, state, or regional level can really help to reduce the barriers associated with installing electric vehicle charging stations. And the comprehensive plan specifically is a tool that municipalities might want to consider as a way of setting those goals associated with electric vehicle adoption and electric vehicle charging station availabilities in their town. So anytime a comprehensive plan is up for re-evaluation, for updating, or for, or not necessarily, yeah, for re-evaluation or for updates or for a new kind of mobility plan, you'll want to start considering how the future of electric cars factors in to the goals and policies that are set forth in those plans. So I want to show you a quick example. New Rochelle, again, they are envisioned in our comprehensive plan incorporated principles for sustainability and set forth a framework for sustainability and specifically highlighted and called out the need for sustainability in transportation. And some of the programs that they mentioned within that comp plan included an EV shuttle service, expanded electric vehicle supply equipment, a green fleet initiative, and creating EV-only spots in their municipal lots. I'm going to skip through some of these initiatives and programs because I know that they will be covered tomorrow in tomorrow's presentation, and also because Jill and Jacob touched on them briefly. But just to say that there are incentives and financial incentives available both at the state level and at the national level to help offset the cost of installing electric vehicle charging stations. So increasingly that is less of a barrier. And I know that in the next presentation, we can get into the nitty-gritty of how those incentives can be paired together to result in sometimes zero cost installations for level 2 charging stations. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is just how participating in initiatives and programs such as the National Drive Electric Week can help to continually encourage transition to electric vehicles, can raise awareness. So organizing to have electric vehicle expos, demos, ride and drives, and other activities that allow people to see electric cars, get in them, ask questions, see how the charging station works, understand from actual drivers what the advantages and disadvantages are, can really go a long way in helping that transition. How are we doing on time? We are on mute.
It's 4 o'clock right now. We had about 15 minutes left in your presentation time, so accounting for some time for questions as well. So
okay,
probably got another 10 minutes if you have the slides.
Yeah, I have several more slides, so I'll take another 5 minutes and then we can do a Q&A.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. So, you know, sorry, I messed up my own flow by interrupting myself. All right, so some of the best practices. Every installation context for electric charging station is unique and therefore has a different cost associated. But so municipalities should really play a role in encouraging anyone considering to install electric charging stations to comply with the industry best practices for siting, design, and installation. And that also includes requiring and encouraging that anybody considering installing the stations work with a certified electrician to connect that new infrastructure. Things to look for, you want to make sure that the electric charging station model that's being suggested for installation makes sense for the installation context. So that means reviewing and making sure that the mounting type and cord management systems make sense for the context that is being considered. Making sure that the location of the charging station is optimal for reducing overall costs, optimal for wayfinding so that it's easy to find within a lot or garage, or has alternative plans for installing signage that help people actually navigate to the charging station. Because having a charging station that's hard to find can be really discouraging and frustrating for the drivers. So you want to make sure that they're in visible locations. You want to pay careful attention to putting the charging station, installing the charging station as close as possible to the electrical panel, and making sure that all the electrical supply is up to capacity and up to code. Again, this will help to reduce overall costs, but the shorter the distance the wire run has to be, the less cost overall. And I know we'll get into that in the next conversation as well. Municipalities can also play a really important role in making sure that permitting processes are streamlined, and that do as much as they can to reduce overall costs, so that that is not a barrier for people wanting to install this infrastructure. And then other things that should be considered depending on the context include protection. So installing a bollard, if there's a high turnover expectation, or if there's any risk of the staging itself being damaged by people pulling in or backing out, or whatever it may be. Having a maintenance plan in place and having signage that allows people to find them. By properly planning for a charging station installation, so siting close to an electrical panel, reducing trenching that's required, you can reduce overall costs for installation quite significantly. And the municipal planning boards play a really important role as they're reviewing new site plans or new development plans. Whether or not charging stations are included in those plans, they can now play a role in suggesting to include electric charging stations. Or if the applicant is unwilling to include a charging station at that point in time, they can suggest at least laying conduit and having adequate electrical capacity so that a charging station can be installed at a future date, should somebody request it, or should the applicant change their mind. So planning for electric vehicles in every new development or major rehab will help to reduce costs in the long run, and planning boards can play an important role of helping to share that information with applicants. There are also opportunities potentially to use the installation of charging stations as a tool for bargaining in exchange for variance. So if your municipality or town does not have incentives already available, then individuals might consider using the installation of public access charging station as a way of getting a variance on their overall parking requirement, even if it's not included as a requirement in code, or to use that as a tool for increasing the density, floor area coverage, other things that developers may want to include in new developments. So I think that municipalities should be open to those types of conversations and bargaining to support overall increasing access to the charging station. Other things that you should consider when installing charging station is that that vehicles are typically going to park for a long time, so 3 to 4 hours. You want to have good visibility and lighting. You might want to consider having ADA compliance for the charging stations as well, including that 3-foot aisle on either side of the charging station. You want to make sure that they're included in places that, especially if it's going to be public access, that there's 24-hour access. A lot of the apps that help people, electric vehicle owners, to navigate to infrastructure are really, they say the hour availability, but having 24 hours is especially good to increase that or reduce overall range anxiety and provide more options for those chargers. And then you also want to consider the 20 year-round cycle. Make sure that charging stations are protected from snow and or impact from snow removal and bad weather. So if that means having them under a canopy or including bollards so that they're not impacted because of snow, or making sure that they're clearly signed with a tall sign so that they don't accidentally get knocked over by a snowplow or whatever it may be. Those are also things that you want to think about. And then some of the places where we've seen charging stations really have a lot of success and a lot of use include retail clusters, workplaces. Most charging events are either going to happen at home or at work. So workplaces are a really critical spot to have charging stations installed, and there are several programs that are specifically geared towards that. Again, also on college and university campuses, train stations, multifamily housing. Medical campuses are a big place. Some of the biggest users of early adopters of electric vehicles are medical employees, doctors and nurses. And there are a lot of visitors to those locations as well. So having charging stations in those locations has seen a lot of success when it has been included. Downtown areas as well. And then the last thing, every installation context is different and unique, but since a charging station can confer kind of multiple benefits for the public realm, you might want to consider all of the urban design context as well when considering including electric charging. So thinking about lighting and parks and adjacencies to retail, commercial adjacencies and connections to other modes of transportation, street marking, signage, etc. Should all be part of your planning for charging stations. So I'm not going to go into all of the planning that has gone into the on-street charge program for New York City DOT and Con Edison, but if folks have any questions, I am available and we can kind of go through any of those questions as well in the Q&A.
So I'm not seeing any questions on the presentation as of now. So anybody, those of you attendees on the call, feel free to ask, put in the chat box or the question in a poll, any questions that you might have for Amina. One thing I had, Amina, was, I noticed, I think it was a slide that you jumped through with some of the upstate examples, of kind of best practices of some municipal EV readiness. I was just more or less pointing it out. I think some of this is, included in that guidance documentation that NYSERDA has on their website. So I just want to let everybody on the call know, I think when I send out the slides and presentation recording, I'll probably post some of the links to these guidance documents as well that are going to be helpful, I think, to those on the call. But it's good to note that, some of this policy is being put in place in upstate New York already, right? And there's some local examples that we can pull from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and these are organized from the lowest intervention to the more significant interventions. So Town of Auto, for example, they defined electric vehicle charging station in their code, so that is, and as an approved use as an approved use in their codes and zoning. So people know what it is and that it can be installed. And then Town of New Paltz, they went quite a bit further, set electric charging station requirement for new public access parking lots and garages. So a minimum requirement for installing the charging infrastructure. They simplified their review process and planning procedure, which can really make or break somebody's decision in actually installing. And they empowered the planning board to set design standards and regulations for how and where charging stations are installed. And another example to call out, is New York City's local law 110 that sets a requirement that any new garage or parking lot or any major rehab of an existing parking lot or garage, that they have 20% of those parking spaces be pre-ready for the installation of electric charging stations. So it doesn't actually require at this point in time that charging stations be installed, but it does require that there be adequate electrical capacity and conduit and stubs already in place for future installations. And there are rumors, and I don't know, maybe tomorrow there will be confirmation of those rumors. There are rumors that that local law is going to be strengthened to set a minimum requirement for installing charging stations. And we're seeing that happen increasingly across the country, moving from kind of encouraging electric charging stations to actually requiring electric charging stations.
Yeah, that's great to know. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the question pod, and we are at time. So I think, thank you, Amina. I think that was great. A lot of really valuable information in that presentation for the municipalities on the call. But I think we'll move on to Ron, if you want to share your screen. And so thank you, Amina. Oh, sorry about that. Ron Semp is our final presenter for this afternoon from Plug-in Stations Online. Ron is the Director of Commercial Sales for Plug-in Stations Online and has worked in this capacity since September 2019. In this role, Ron and his team of sales professionals are responsible for direct stakeholder engagement, promoting electric vehicle charging for commercial, institutional, and municipal end users. He is also responsible for project development, which includes site consultation, proposal development, and sales. Ron holds a bachelor's degree from SUNY Empire State in business management and economics, and is an Association of Energy Engineers Certified Energy Manager. So thank you for being with us this afternoon, Ron, and it's all yours.
Great, thanks, thanks Jacob and Amina and Jill for setting me up here. So I do have some good news. The presentation is going to be relatively short. I don't know that I'll keep the whole 45 minutes. Amina did cover a lot of the topics that that I had prepared to plan for. So, but anyway, I hope to be able to drill down a little bit further on some of this, so that we get into some of the details of planning and permitting, and some of the best practices based on what we've found over the years. So just a little bit about plug-in stations. My company here. Hold on, there we go. We were founded in 2011, so that doesn't seem like a very old company, but in terms of electric vehicle charging, we're a dinosaur. So I'm happy to say that my company installed the very first publicly accessible electric vehicle charger in the Capital District at the Holiday Inn in Albany, and we've installed hundreds and hundreds of plugs since then. A lot of the municipalities that were on Jill's list earlier as being participants in the Clean Communities programs, we've worked with to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure over the years here. So pretty ingrained in the industries, particularly here in the Albany area. But we do have capacity to serve basically all of the Northeast, and we do regularly. We also have a satellite office in Palm Beach, Florida. So that's a market that we've begun to do work in. So basically what we do is we're a turnkey electric vehicle charging infrastructure installer. So we basically will take a completely undeveloped existing or a new construction site, and bring the electrical infrastructure and the equipment, and do the installation, commissioning, work with end users to choose the equipment that works for them, and get the station installed and commissioned. So basically we work with, we're technology agnostic, so depending on what the design spec is for the end user, we will work with any, just about any EVSE manufacturer that's out there. And like I said, we've a great deal of experience, and we've worked all across the Northeast and have installed probably almost 1,000 charging ports at this point. So it gives us a lot of experience, and we've worked with municipalities on permitting and planning all across the Northeast, and we kind of get a sense for what works and what doesn't, and we really have a good feel for what municipalities are currently doing and what makes the most sense. So that's what I'll sort of touch on or get into today. But first, I'm not going to go into this. We all have heard that EVs are a growing industry, and we're looking at 30% year-over-year growth, and that's evidenced by the amount of investment that that vehicle manufacturers are placing or putting towards electric vehicle development for their fleets. We saw similar slides to this, so we're looking at about 50,000 plus EVs on the road in New York, concentrated obviously in more of the suburban and urban areas, which the Capital District is one of. So now getting into building codes and planning, some of the things that you need to consider, and Amina touched on almost all of these topics. So level 2 charging versus DC fast charging. That's something that you as planners and code enforcers need to understand the difference between the two. We need to understand the accessibility, or really get an idea of who's using the station, and if the intended use is for public, or is that accessible by everybody. We need to consider signage and visibility of the station. Safety and security is a big one. Impact on the parking space itself and the parking area, whether it's a municipal parking lot or a commercial parking lot or multifamily space. Something to consider is the hardware quality as the industry continues to mature here. We're seeing a lot more station manufacturers coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, with their stations, and not all charging stations are created equal. So kind of having a general understanding of the hardware that's out there and the different qualities that are out there is probably good. Permit requirements. So what type of documentation should you be asking for, or is necessary when permitting charging stations? Something I can dive into a little bit more in depth is ADA. It's sort of an emerging topic that we're gonna really need to begin considering as electric vehicles become adopted by a wider range of individuals, including those with disabilities. So we need to make sure that we're considering their needs when installing electric vehicle charging, not only from the station design itself and installation for the handicapped EV driver, but other handicapped folks trying to maneuver around the existing station. We need to make sure that we consider them. Electrical capacity, charging stations, particularly DC fast charging stations, they draw a lot of power, so we want to make sure that the infrastructure that's in place is adequate to support that. And then station protection, we'll talk about how stations are mounted and what's the best practices there, as well as protecting the station from vehicle impact and snow removal and things like that. So I think the first step in coming up with a plan to handle EV charging from a permitting and planning standpoint is to put the requirements on paper. So as we go through and work with different municipalities, pull permits and request zoning permits and things like that, the best or the easiest way to work with those municipalities is if they have a written standardized project requirements or list of things that they're looking for, whether it's regulations or codes or just deliverables in terms of documentation, what they need in terms of site maps and drawings and spec sheets and things like that. So to have everything on a list and in some sort of a document form that they can give to contractors like ourselves and developers and users would be is really helpful. So something to consider when developing this project requirement list is defining all of the terms. Just like any specialized industry, we have our acronyms and special language that we use that not everybody might know. So making sure we define some basic terms associated with EV charging. Talk about charging level, level 2 versus DC fast charging. Perhaps there might be some zoning considerations, whether or not you want to put DC fast chargers in basically anywhere, or do you want to keep them in certain zones? Same thing with level 2 chargers. What type of use you want to make sure or consider. Is it a multifamily situation, commercial or fleet situation? Some of those things, there might be different requirements for different use cases. Permitted locations. So in some cases, particularly when we're talking about DC fast charging, you'll have a lot of people, EV drivers, using it for a short amount of time. And do you want EV drivers coming off the highway to plug into a DC fast charging station, driving through a neighborhood or something like that? So making sure there's strategic placement of stations is important. Excuse me. You want to consider design standards, and we'll get into some of those in a few minutes here. And then equipment specifications. So what are some of the specs, or do you want to get into whether or not you should require a certain level of performance for the stations that are installed if they are available for the public to use? So we talked about the different charging levels. So in this case, we'll be talking about level 2 and level 3 charging only, but I'm not going to go into the definition of each because we've already been through that earlier in the presentations here. So from a site design standpoint, let's talk about site design recommendations on the type of documentation that you're looking for when applying for a permit or a zoning permit, electric permit, building permit, etc. So what we typically do, and what we found to be the sort of the easiest, most straightforward way to handle a site plan, is take a simple satellite image of the area and make sure we call out the charger locations and call out the parking spaces that are going to be designated for electric vehicles. Call out where the underground conductors and conduit is going to go. Call out where we're pulling power from, whether it's a new service or we're using existing service. So this gives a sort of a good overview of what the charging plan is and what's going into it. The thing that we want to try to avoid, and Amina talked about it a little bit, was trying to keep the costs down and certainly remove barriers in terms of EV charging adoption. So one of the ways that we can do that is to sort of avoid asking for engineered stamp drawings, architectural drawings, things like that can be pretty onerous and expensive. We've seen, like I said earlier, we've seen lots of different scenarios and different requirements from municipalities anywhere from just a simple one-page questionnaire about the project and a check for 25 bucks and you got yourself a permit, all the way up to having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on stamp site drawings and design drawings, and pretty much everywhere in between. So there really is a happy medium there, and making sure that you do have an idea of what's going into the project and how it's being installed in the site plan, but doing that in a way that's not too onerous for the project developer and costly for the end user. So, understanding that we want to encourage EV charging installations, and making sure that the permitting process is as you still get the information you need, but you make sure that you're not putting too much on the customer in terms of cost and hoops to jump through. From an electrical design, there's no need to really reinvent the wheel here. We're essentially running circuits to an outdoor appliance is really what we're doing. So, honestly, there's no reason to treat it any different than you would either a light pole or maybe a parking payment kiosk or something like that. So it's very similar in terms of what goes into bringing power to that site. What we found is just a simple line drawing of the basic circuitry is generally adequate. And then certainly following the pre and post inspection practices so that your inspectors understand what's going into the project, and make sure that they look at it to see the quality of the craftsmanship as it relates to the electrical circuitry. So this is an example of a line drawing that basically shows the what's required in terms of circuits. So a typical level 2 charger is going to be run off of 40 amp, two 40 amp circuits. That's one 40 amp circuit for each plug, and that's connected to the station as it's shown here on this drawing. So again, this is not a site specific drawing. This is a very simple drawing of a single station, which should be adequate when combined with the site plan and the and some of the other documentation that we're going to go through here. So one of the considerations that's really emerging as important is station accessibility and ADA access. So some of the questions that we need to ask, or you need to ask when considering an EV project or considering zoning guidelines or code guidelines for EV charging is, are the stations publicly accessible? So if the public is invited to charge their vehicle at the station, can they get to it? Do they know where it is? Is the site host or the station owner charging for use of the station? Is that charge, how is that charge signed? How do they know what they're paying for use? How is payment collected? Is there a credit card swipe or is payment collected through some other method? Is it safe? Is the site safe? Is it lit? All of these things are really important to consider when the public is being invited to use a station that might be on a commercial space. So if a station isn't intended for public use, how is the access managed? Is it under lock and key? Is it in a garage? Is there some other method of locking up the station or not allowing the general public to use the station if it's not intended for public use? So these are all things that need to be considered when looking at an EV charging project. From an ADA standpoint, so when considering ADA, is the station publicly accessible? So would you require ADA if it's not a publicly accessible station? are there restrictions and access to walkways, ramps, or entrances? So that's to me is something that's really important. Is making sure when we install a charging station that we're not restricting any kind of pathways or entrances or anything like that for folks with disabilities, and can they navigate around the station when we install it? And are the stations accessible to handicapped drivers? So are they able to interface with the station and pay for use? Are they able to grab the plug and plug it into their car and maneuver around other cars? So these are all, like I said, emerging issues that need to be considered when putting a project together here. So here's some general guidelines, and you can dive into it. I think the presentations will be shared here, but basically what we tried to do is keep the front of the station around 10 inches from the face of, if it's a curb or some kind of a sidewalk. We want to make sure that we keep it, no more than 10 inches from the face of the curb, so that allows somebody in a wheelchair to pull up to the station and be able to use the station. An important access point, we want to make sure that there's 36 inches of space behind the station. So anybody in a wheelchair or some other type of equipment can get behind the station and without having to walk or wheel into green space or bushes or something like that. So in many cases, there's modifications to the existing sidewalk that needs to take place to ensure that that's the case. Some other considerations might be being able to get from the front of the car to the station location. So whether or not you put wheel stops in to stop the car from nosing right up to the station, giving access to people in wheelchairs. So these are all considerations that we need to look at. And again, I'll share this slide with you so you can dive into a little bit more. Signage, another area that's pretty important. We want, especially when installing publicly accessible chargers, we need to know where the charger is. We don't want EV drivers driving around a parking lot aimlessly trying to find a station that they know is around here somewhere. So we want to make sure that EV charging spaces are adequately signed. That can be combined with new striping. Some site hosts like to paint the whole parking space green, while others will have a stencil. So there's lots of different strategies to adequately stripe and sign an EV charging parking space. If it's a municipal owned station and space, certainly parking enforcement is something that needs to be considered. Whether or not you treat it in the same way you would treat an ADA spot, or where you would write tickets or come up with some other form of punishment if somebody's parked in an EV charging spot and not charging their vehicle. So there's lots of ways that you can manage that, but the first step is making sure it's adequately signed. Station protection and mounting. So the stations themselves are a pretty heavy investment for whether it's a municipality installing stations on their own for their in their own municipal lots, or for a commercial customer. And we want to make sure that those stations are adequately protected from vehicles. So at minimum, you should have either a wheel stop or a parking bollard installed properly that should protect the station against somebody who sort of overshoots the curb with the front of their car, and that's helpful. One of the other things that we'll talk about quick too is station footings. So again, the station itself is a piece of equipment that should be mounted to a solid base. Here in the Northeast, we have a lot of frost heave and weather conditions, and we want to make sure that stations that are installed are permanent, and any movement of the station won't crack any connections or wires, creating a safety problem. So this is a typical mounting spec. Kind of a lot here, but the image on the left, or the detail on the left, is the pier that the station gets mounted to. So we bury them 4 feet, well below the frost line, and we embed the electrical conduit and the mounting hardware right into the pier. So installing it this way protects against any kind of movement from the weather, frost heave, and things like that. And then you can see in front of that, we have the design for the parking bollard. So the parking bollard is buried in concrete, and then is also filled with concrete once the bollard's installed and set. That way, it provides adequate protection against any kind of damage from a vehicle or snowplow. So that's pretty much what I have here, and happy to answer any questions that you might have, or get into any of these topics a little bit deeper if you wish.
So we did have one question, Ron, and that was just on whether or not the slides are going to be available online or through other means. But as I mentioned, so I'm going to be sending out the slides to all the presenters this afternoon, and as well as tomorrow's presentations to the attendee list later on this week once I get those compiled and packaged up. I'm also going to be compiling the recorded presentations and setting up a page on the Clean Communities Coalition website, as well as the CDCC's website, which I'll send those links to as well to the attendee list. So you all should have access to the presentations in a number of ways. Are there any other questions for Ron at this point? I'm not seeing any. Here we have one. Ron, is your company a certified charge point installer?
Yes, we have a deep relationship with ChargePoint from the beginning, and we do probably 75% of our business is using ChargePoint's equipment in one way or another.
That's great. And on the topic of ChargePoint, actually, Ryan Backley from ChargePoint will be a presenter on tomorrow afternoon's presentation to go over EVSE networking options. So to go over how once the stations are installed, how they can be set up to accept payment and networked together, and kind of the different options that you have at that point once the installations are complete. I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. I mean, I guess one thing I had, Ron, was just, I was wondering, you know, you mentioned not requiring the stamped site documents from an engineer. You know, not being super familiar with it, I assume they're expensive. I mean, what's a range to get a stamped document from an engineer? How much extra can that kind of add on to the process for the installer?
So it could add, I think starting point would probably be $1,000 just to have, you know, an engineer put a site plan together, and can go way up depending on how much granularity you're looking for. Right.
And depending on the infrastructure, that could be a, you know, pretty significant percentage of the entire project, right?
It can, and there are times that engineer drawings would be appropriate, particularly when you're looking at DC fast charging. Those sites can be a bit more complex and a lot more there's a lot more that can go wrong if designed improperly. So again, I don't want it to seem like an engineered drawing or review would never be appropriate, but just for a standard commercial level 2 project, I think it's overkill in my humble opinion.
I've got another comment here in the chat box from Amina, actually, Ron. What stations or networking options do you usually recommend for a multifamily unit development?
It really depends. There's 2 parking scenarios in a multifamily development. There's either assigned parking or sort of a open parking plan. So it would really depend on what the parking scenario is. For an open parking plan, we would recommend a typical commercial publicly accessible charger. And for a deeded or assigned parking, there are lower cost options, level 2 chargers, but lower cost because they're not designed to be used by the general public. Basically, it's assigned to a single household that has that parking space. The network works similarly to where the power generally comes from the house panel from the landlord, and the landlord would recover costs from the tenant through a charging network, whether it's ChargePoint, Green Lots, EV Connector. There's a couple others out there as well.
Very good, thanks. So I'm not seeing any other questions. If that's all you have, Ron, I think we can wrap up a bit early today. I want to thank all the presenters for being on this afternoon. I think it was some great presentations and definitely valuable to our attendees. Also want to thank the attendees for participating this afternoon, and hopefully we will virtually have you here again tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 5 for our second round of presenters. Just to go over those quickly, tomorrow we're going to have Jeff Flagg from the city of Glens Falls to go over kind of a local perspective on their recent installation of some municipal EVSE in the city's downtown. As I mentioned earlier, Ryan Backley from ChargePoint will be on the presentation tomorrow to go over charging infrastructure networking options. And then tomorrow, the final presentation tomorrow will be from Jason Zimbler of NYSERDA to go over the current zero emission vehicle incentive options to help kind of put the vehicles in your hand and infrastructure in the ground on the municipal side of things. So again, just want to remind everyone that I'm going to be posting this webinar and some of the guidance documents on our website, and as well as sending those out directly to you. And you will be receiving a follow-up email from through the webinar software where you can ask any final questions or provide comments on the webinar. You're also more than welcome to send those emails directly to me. Actually, there is another question that just popped up. So again, thank you all for being here, but I will go over this final question in case for those of you that are still on. What percentage of parking spaces for apartment housing? So I'm thinking, I guess, what that, is there a typical, if it's going to be in a multifamily, is there a typical number of chargers that you want to see per unit if it's kind of done at a community level, Ron?
So what I do is talk to the site host about how far out they want to plan for. So if they have a 5-year plan, we usually talk 5%, 5 to 10% of the parking spaces should should have EV charging or should consider EV charging to get you through the next five years or so. Sometimes that's not always feasible, but that's a goal. And if they want a longer range approach, or if it's new construction, we look at over 10% of the parking spaces should be EV ready. If you're looking at a relatively medium, we'll call it a medium range planning process.
Very good. Again, I guess that's all the questions I'm seeing right now. So if that's all, again, thank you everyone for participating. And we'll wrap up here and hopefully see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, presenters.